Hello, welcome everybody to this symposium of the CODE NL-D project. My name is Arjon Dunnewind, this day without beard, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this afternoon in which we will discuss the issue of digital agency and how we can reclaim digital agency. CODE is a collaboration project between IMPAKT in Utrecht and the Berlin-based School of Machines. And in the upcoming weeks and months, together with the 28 participants that have subscribed to also the upcoming events in the CODE project, together with you, hopefully as an audience of this CODE NL-D Symposium, we want to discuss how we can reclaim our digital agency, how we can, in a dialogue with politicians, maybe work towards better legislation that somehow safeguards our position as users and consumers of technology, the digital platforms that we basically cannot live without anymore. So opting out is not really an option, but if we stay in and use these platforms, we want to do that on a fair basis. And so today we'll discuss with some major players in these issues how we can improve legislation, how we can establish a more fair relationship between the major tech companies that provide us with the platforms and the technologies and the devices, and us as users. The program is threefold today. We'll start first with a panel, and then there's a short keynote by Gillian York, and then the second panel today we'll discuss with a few artists how art can inspire the changes that we want. But the first panel that we're about to start will address what kind of changes we think are necessary. So what do we want to see changed? What are the major issues here at stake? What are the most problematic situations in the current relation between us as the users and the technology providers? And we're going to do that with two guests. Unfortunately, the third guest that was announced for today, Queeny Rajkowski, a Dutch politician, had to cancel yesterday last minute. So we're very sorry to not have her in today's panel. But we're very interested to hear the opinions of the two other speakers. Leonieke Verhoog will speak on behalf of Public Spaces, a Dutch initiative that mainly brings together broadcasters, but also other public bodies. But first, we're going to start with Evelyn Austin. Evelyn Austin is the director of Bits of Freedom, and in her presentation, she will address these issues of how we can improve our agency, our digital agency, and how relationships between the tech providers and us as users should change. Each presentation, also Leonique's presentation, will be about 8 minutes long. Then there's a short possibility for some immediate questions that you might have, and then we'll go on to the next presentation. And then the second part of this panel is about 30 minutes of discussion between the speakers. Also, we hope to get you, our audience, involved. We hope to get the participants to the CODE project involved. So please think of the questions that you would like to ask, think maybe of the comments that you would like to make, and share them with us. You can use the chat function in YouTube if you're on YouTube. If you're in the Zoom, you can use the chat function there. So we welcome the questions. They will be forwarded to me, and I will share them with the speakers and with the audience. So now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome in this stream Evelyn Austin, and she will present on behalf of Bits of Freedom. Evelyn Austin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's weird not to be able to see you, but we'll make do, I'm sure. I wish you could just interrupt me and ask questions, but I don't think that's possible. If it is, then feel free to do so. I'm happy to interrupt what I've prepared if there's something that feels more urgent or applicable to what we're going to do today. I am the ED of Bits of Freedom, which is a digital rights organization based in Amsterdam. We work in the Netherlands and in Brussels. And we've been active, well, we've been around for over 20 years and active for the past 11. So before I dive into what we think needs to happen, I want to talk briefly about the why and the how, because I think those are at least equally important. Whatever your problem analysis or your vision of the world is, hopefully it will heavily influence what you do and how you do it, but also kind of serve as a compass for along the way as you make progress or not towards these goals. And I think especially when we look at policy in the technological realm, the problem analysis is often lacking, causing for bad policy to be made. So a little bit of background, I'm going to keep it short. I think it will be about half of this presentation, and then the second half will be the what. So Bits of Freedom focuses on two sort of intersecting trends. So the first is what you see here, which is that the monitoring, predicting, and influencing behavior has become central to how governments, companies, and public institutions govern. The second is that the public space, meaning sort of the unrestricted space that people have to congregate and to participate in the democratic process, has either moved online or has become increasingly datafied and surveilled, and oftentimes, of course, both. So what does this mean? It means that our communications infrastructure, data and data-driven technologies have really become crucial to power and to power relationships. And what we see, other than, of course, what the big promise of the internet was 30 years ago, is that it isn't dismantling existing and archaic power structures, but it's actually enforcing them. And at the same time, the functioning of power is becoming more and more opaque. So that causes a problem. It means that the possibility to question power is becoming more and more difficult. And it means that the ability for the people who are in power to explain themselves also becomes more difficult. And then together, I think that means that the sort of space that there is for the advancement of social agendas that propose an alternative to the status quo is becoming smaller and smaller. And you could argue that it's actually too small at the moment. So what does Bits of Freedom believe in? We don't think the internet is broken. We think that it can and should be used as a powerful tool in the fight for equal opportunities and rights. It can bring knowledge and culture closer and make participation in public life a lot more accessible. And in that sense, it's still one of the most powerful tools we have in order to advance an open and free society. So that brings us to the how. So how are we going to do this? We feel that two rights are actually essential for that free and open society. They're the freedom to communicate and the right to privacy. So why are these so important? Of course, they're human rights in themselves, but they also enhance many of our civil and political liberties. So think, for instance, about the right to equal treatment, the freedom of assembly, the right to social and legal certainty. And they can also protect against the erosion of these rights by datafication. So that's why they're incredibly powerful. So we really see them as two tools. Then the Bits of Freedom, of course, is a policy organization. we're a policy organization because we believe that strong laws and policy offer the sort of the most protection for the biggest amount of people for the longest possible period of time. But there, of course, are many other ways that you can sort of become active and influence politics, but this is the way that we do it. So all our work is based on legal and technological research. We're mainly an advocacy organization, and we run campaigns and every once in a while also take legal action. So that's the how. We're, just for the sake of transparency, this is how we're funded. About 15 years ago, Bits of Freedom was one of the organizations that founded European Digital Rights, which you see on the right, that now exists over 45 European digital rights organizations, which is wonderful because there's Europe is becoming more and more important, of course. So that brings me to the what. I'm going to very quickly go through sort of four areas where we feel represent the pressure points where we're most likely to have an impact over the coming few years in advancing this agenda. So three are pieces of policy that are currently being made. And the fourth is a more kind of overarching topic of counterpower. So first, the three policy areas. I'm sure this is not a surprise, but the Artificial Intelligence Act that was proposed by the European Commission a few months ago and is currently being discussed by the European Parliament and the Council will try to regulate many of the sort of topics that I was discussing. There's a lot to be said about this act. It's also quite large, but for the sake of today, I would like to just briefly mention two things. The first is the so-called red lines that the act introduces. And the second one is the topic of transparency. So first, the red lines. So civil society has been arguing for quite some time that the European Commission should introduce red lines that talk about what is considered a lawful use of an AI system and what isn't. And so we're happy to hear that those were going to be included in this act, but we're not so happy about the way they have been included. There are a few red lines, but there are also many more exceptions and limitations to those red lines, which actually kind of renders them useless. The three most important ones for us is that there should be sort of without hesitation and without buts and exceptions, limitations to using AI systems for social scoring, especially when it comes to systems that determine if you are eligible to receive sort of social benefits. The second one is that the Act now has a ban on the monetizing of vulnerabilities that people have, but only when you can argue that that monetization of vulnerabilities will lead to big harms. That's setting the bar kind of low, so we feel that monetizing people's vulnerabilities should be illegal, full stop. And then the third one is that is the use of biometric surveillance in public space. Again, the red lines does mention this, but then has so many exceptions, and the language is quite vague that really it doesn't yet actually protect us from biometric surveillance. So then the point of transparency. There are, in the Act as it is now, people in some cases have the right to know that they've been subjected to AI systems. We feel people should always have that right. Also, users of AI systems, so the person who's in charge of the AI system, is obligated to be able to interpret the outcome of the systems. Again, we feel that that isn't enough, and also, what the hell does that mean? We feel whoever is using an AI system should be able to explain what went into the system, what happened. They should be able to check the outcomes to see if they were actually, if they're actually lawful. So some work needs to be done there. And furthermore, sort of the way the Act deals with transparency, it's really placing the burden on the individual, whereas we feel it should be, for instance, the government's responsibility to make sure they're accountable. And I think this is really indicative of a larger problem that we have with transparency in the context of technological policy, where we focus too much on transparency and not enough on predictability and accountability. So the second policy domain that we feel is a good pressure point is biometric surveillance in public space. So as I mentioned, this could be regulated within the AI Act. It also couldn't be. So in case it isn't, I think we need to explore other options. This is a Dutch company, just to sort of highlight or emphasize the importance that this is done and done quickly. This is a Dutch company that offers a facial recognition service that will help you distinguish between 4 types of races. And I think we're all aware by now of the many examples of how these systems can be put to bad use. I always like adding this last example, just because I think we cannot highlight enough that sort of the huge commercial interests that are actually driving a lot of this progress. So as I mentioned, we need to also look at alternatives to the AI Act in case there we don't get what we need. This is another initiative where collecting signatures to towards a European Citizens Initiative, which will push the European Commission to again consider regulating biometric surveillance. So that you can find this information on reclaimyourface.eu. Then the final policy area that I want to mention is the Digital Services Act and the Digital Media Act. So another European piece of regulation currently being discussed and being heavily lobbied. So this is where the online communications ecosystem is going to be regulated, we hope. And this is the place where we can advocate for things like interoperability, kind of separating the hosting of information from the management layer of information. It's where we can ask for a ban on dark patterns, on ad tech, et cetera, et cetera. Then finally, the issue of counterpower. So in the Netherlands, this has been a really hot topic over the last couple of months. There's a lack of counterpower. We've been promised that that's really going to change. And I think this lack of counterpower, you really don't see that. So where you really feel that and see it is when it comes to the digital environment. So over the years, we've seen the police and the secret services gaining in power. And we've also seen that they've been unable to abide by the law. We've had scandal after scandal and apologies after apologies. One of the latest scandal was the National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism. It turned out they had been unlawfully surveilling citizens for a couple of years on social media. Of course, that was a scandal. However, rather than sort of reining in the national coordinator, the Minister of Justice that the national coordinator falls under decided to take a different approach. So last week, without the sort of usual press release, etc., the minister announced and published online as an internet consultation a new law that regulates how the National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism is allowed to collect and analyze and share data. The interesting thing is, one, this is a very common approach when the secret services or the police can't abide by the law. Rather than adjusting their practice, they adjust the law so that whatever it was that they were doing, they can continue doing, but now with a lawful base. The other interesting thing is that is the length people are given to respond to this consultation. So usually the minimum is 4 weeks. For this extremely far-reaching law, you could argue that actually it enables the institutionalization of a second secret service. We get a week's notice, so 5 working days for citizens and civil society to respond to it. That was it. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas about how to do this.
Audience member. Her question is, if you could talk a bit more maybe about this idea of monetizing vulnerabilities. Can you give some examples of it? What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, so the Act talks specifically about using vulnerabilities that have to do with someone's age, physical or psychological vulnerabilities to make money off of those. So you could imagine maybe an easy example would be profiling people based on this type of data about people. So if you know that someone has psychological issues, you could serve them ads that make use of those.
Yeah. No. Thanks. Maybe let's jump now to Leoniike's presentation, and then we'll be back with you and with Leonieke to have a discussion, the 3 of us, and hopefully with the audience members. Thanks a lot, Evelyn. And Leonieke, we'd like to give the floor to you for your presentation on behalf of Public Spaces, an organization that's bringing together several Dutch broadcasters and other big festivals and public parties. Please welcome Leonieke Verhoog.
Yeah, that's kind of funny that you have picked a picture of my colleague, but that's kind of funny. I'll start presenting. And first, let me respond on Evelyn and Bits of Freedom. We are really collaborating on this fight for a more honest internet, I think, reclaiming a new internet with a focus on public domain. I'll talk a bit about what public spaces is and the difference between Bits of Freedom, maybe to make it clear, is to so we work for the same goals, I think, but Bits of Freedom, I think, is more focused on the consumers or the end users, and we are more focused on the different organizations, public organizations. Let me start with the presentation. Let's see if this works. I'll start with a short video to explain what the problem is and what we are doing with public spaces to fight this problem.
2021.
Almost 30 years after the invention of the World Wide Web, many internet applications that are indispensable
for our lives as economic and social citizens
have turned into vehicles for political control and economic profit.
It is unacceptable that public organizations have to interact with their audience using commercial platforms,
where citizens are no longer seen as subjects,
but objects.
This is like having your passport sold whenever you visit a public library.
Like being allowed in a public debate centre only if you have a specific political view.
Or only being allowed to watch the news after you hand over the names of all your friends.
This is why 25 museums,
public broadcasters,
libraries,
debate centers,
innovation hubs,
festivals and skate parks
have formed
public spaces.
Internet for the common good.
It will take some time
and many small steps,
but the moment is right.
Together we will build an internet that strengthens the public domain and forms a safe place for humans like you and me.
And me.
And me.
And me.
Join Public Spaces
at publicspaces.net.
So Public Spaces is an organization that works on a public space on the internet, so a digital public space. And as Arjen already said, and also in the video, we're a broad coalition of public and civic organizations in the Netherlands, but also in the rest of Europe. In the video they say 25, but we're at this moment it's already about 40 organizations that are working together. And it's museums, libraries, public broadcasters, different organizations that think it's unacceptable that they have to use commercial tools to reach their audience online. So they're really rethinking on what kind of tools you can use. So it's really focused on software. And altogether, the audience of our members, of our coalition partners, is about 90% of the whole Dutch population. So we really hope and think that we can make a change. And our mission for in 5 years, so we focused on 5 years because it will take a while to replace all this software, but our mission is in 2026, we want all public organizations to use digital tools that are based on public values. And public values is a pretty broad meaning, so I'll talk about it. Let's see if the clicker works. Yeah. I'm not sure if you can see this. For me, it's not that clear, but we have 5 values, that we're working with. These public values that we want the tools to be accountable, user-centric, open, transparent, and sovereign. And these are all different values which we make more concrete also at our website. So, for example, user-centric, that it means, for example, we look at how is it privacy by design? Is in the tool thought about what will be done with the data of the user? What will be done? Where's the data of the user hosted? Let me see. I have some delay. We have 3 lines, 3 parallel roads to work to this mission that we want to get everybody on a more public value digital ecosystem. And I'll walk you through the 3 lines. One, we're trying to raise awareness. We do that by speaking on events like this, also giving interviews in newspapers, but also we have a pretty active publishing strategy since last year. So we try to write a lot of articles, mostly in Dutch, but also in English. So it's different. It's a mix of languages, actually, because we focus on both national and international partners. We write about the initiatives people are trying and exploring and talking about stories from our network of public organizations trying to make a transition to a better digital ecosystem. This year we also organized a big conference, 2-day conference, really about the problem, like, okay, why do we need a digital public space? Who are the partners? Who are the players in this field? Who are the alternatives? And how do we get there? What consequences does this have? And we did practical with a lot of technical chiefs from different public organizations, but also more less highbrow talk show in the evening where we talked about it. And all these videos, it was completely in English, so you can also watch it at our website if you click on conference. And we're also campaigning. The second is that we, let me see, this is interesting. The digital laundromat. We're supporting, the second road is that we're supporting the transition of the public organization to get to the open stack of software. And we do this also in 3 ways. The question mark actually was a soap bar. It's a digital laundromat format. I will talk about it after this slide. We have public badges that can show how you're doing with your organization, and we're building a knowledge base, all this to support this transition. Let me see. So the digital laundromat, it's in Dutch, it's called the digitale spoelkeuken. We ask the participating organizations, our partners, to make an inventory of their all the tools, all the digital tools that they use within their organization. And each participating organization is scoring their digital asset on a scale from 0 to 100. So we give them a big question, a list of questions, and questions focused or connected at the values that we have at for the public spaces that I just talked about, and questions like, okay, where's the data hosted? Does the party that you use send away the information about your users? Stuff like that. And then you score. So 0 is really bad, and 100 is then you're really good in public spaces values. What you then do is you compare it to the public spaces, to the public value scale, and then you should, as a public organization, publish your roadmap on how you will change these tools. And we found out that already to make this inventory is already a big step for organizations, because they have to mix different different departments within the organization. For example, marketing, but also the programming department for public broadcasters. They have different departments that mostly don't talk about the tools that they acquire and why they do it and what the privacy rules behind it are. And so to start with this digital laundromat is already a first good step of making people conscious of what kind of tools do you want to use, and what are the values, and is the money also that we want to spend on these tools, and is money the only thing to think about, or is thinking about the safety of your audience also maybe a valuable thing to think about when you start buying a tool. So you have all these different kind of tools from Google Analytics, Form Assembly, and these are the results of VPRO, Dutch Broadcasting Company. They scored actually all their tools already, and the idea is that we work together to create an overview of all these public organizations to see which tools, who is using which tools, and also we can collaborate. So we can ask, for example, to a ticketing system, we can say, okay, over 11 of our partners are using your ticketing system, maybe you should stop using a Facebook pixel in your ticketing system, and then it's better for us too, and also better for the audiences of your customers. So we create this whole list. That's something that we're building. And we have something that we call the badge, the Public Spaces badge. At this moment, it's a small circle at the bottom of a website. At this moment, it's placed at the VPRO.nl and Waag Society's website, and also Film Museum has the badge, but it's now not visible because they just launched a new website. But we're actually rolling out to all the different partners that are connected with Public Spaces Coalition to show that they can show their audience that they're thinking about public values within their environments. And also we want, this Public Spaces badge to give people the idea and start also raising awareness. Think about which systems and which websites also they use. And the third medium that we use to speed up this transition is we're going to build a knowledge base on our website, which is, we're now thinking and talking with Open Social, which is a social community platform where we want to start different groups on different topics. So things like fair media distribution, for example, or how to start a community with a vulnerable group of people, or all kind of different topics, like the challenges that we have within public spaces. And we want to have 3 things for each chapter. We want a kind of Wikipedia place where you can read about it, and the second thing is that you can edit it as well within your group. And the third thing is that you can also communicate it. So we also want to have a chat function, and all these chapters will be combined in the next conference as well. The last conference was supported by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and we're also talking with them to see if they will support, and they're very positive, the next conference as well. So there's some political engagement already, which is also good for you to know, maybe for your projects. And the third road on getting to our mission is forging new alliances. And this is also 3 ways. So we do this national, and we ask the partners as well to be ambassadors on a local scale. So for example, Datum in Enschede, which is an art platform and cultural platform in Enschede. They also have public spaces sessions.
Leonieke? We're running a bit late. It's very interesting. I've got lots of questions, but maybe you could try to wrap it up, and then we'll get Evelyn in again and start the discussion. Sorry for this.
No, good. I was making it longer because we missed one speaker, but let's wrap it up. It's the final slide. Let's see. So we've just been funded by the European Cultural Foundation of the culture of to create this chapter on fair media distribution. So this will be the first chapter of our knowledge base. We're also having the Shared Digital Public Spaces European group, in which we also have the a matrix chat channel, which you can also join. It's open for everybody who wants to talk with international partners and parties on a public domain, a digital public domain. And let me see the final slide. We also try to influence politics. Here on this photo, you also see Evelyn from Bits of Freedom, together with Verhoog and Amnesty International and the Open State Foundation. We during our conference, they did I forgot the name. we had this initiative where 7 political parties said, okay, it's the Stembus Accord. So we will, for the next 4 years within our government, we will focus on the digital human rights, which was really good that they approved this. And the final slide, we want to influence politics, hopefully with you. So if you want to get in touch with us or with one of our partners, the public organizations within the Netherlands, please contact us at leonieke@publicspaces.net, or you can also talk with our international community via the Matrix channel, which is, you can find it at publicspaces.net/talk. And there's a national and an international channel, and you can join both and start a conversation. Okay, thank you so much.
Evelyn also on screen again in our interface. Hi, Evelyn. Let's talk a bit about what you have been presenting and maybe what the common goals between the two of you are and the differences, but also how maybe you can inspire the program that we are doing now, CODE, and the artists and activists, designers, sociologists that we're bringing together, and our audience, of course. I have a question of one of the participants in the program, actually. It's Harm Hofmans. It's a question for Evelyn, but I think it also connects with one of your last slides, Leonieke. So the question is, what's the role of Bits of Freedom in getting the AI Act, or Digital Media Act, on the table of the EU Parliament? How does it work? Do they write proposals, give feedback to Parliament members, or do they work in other ways? And Evelyn, one of your last slides was influencing politics, I think. So this is basically about how do we get this dialogue? How do we start this talk with the politicians? And maybe you can give a few examples of where you feel this has really been successful. Here we made a difference, and I don't know, 1 year later, maybe you can also address the terms on which these changes happen. Probably it's all not as fast as we want. And we say a new law being passed, and we contributed to that. How does it work? Can you give a few examples and tell us why they have been successful?
Good question. So the general rule is that the earlier in you are in policy processes, the bigger your influence can be. One really good example of this was Bits of Freedom decided that we needed a net neutrality law. Back then, Chile was the only country that had net neutrality enshrined into law. So what we did was we wrote what the law could look like, and then started lobbying politicians in the Netherlands for it. Parallel to that, try to get the topic, try to raise awareness under journalists for the topic, so that sort of the pressure on politicians would not only be coming from civil society, but also be coming from the media and hopefully a wider audience. We've been doing that for a while, and then KPN announced that it was going to charge a sort of a tax for the use of WhatsApp. This was when WhatsApp was sort of up and coming. And of course, that was kind of the best example for us to say, okay, this is the type of practice that this net neutrality law that we have here written up, how net neutrality would protect us from this type of practice. That was then given to a member of parliament that then introduced it in Parliament, and then finally it was voted on. And then subsequently, it was also introduced into European law. So I think that was a very successful example. Another very different one is, for instance, GDPR. So the European Commission publishes a proposal, then the European Parliament and the Council both sort of take that proposal, look at it, have all sorts of negotiations, and then come up with their compromise proposal. And then the two compromise proposals are negotiated to finally create the final piece of regulation. That is that can be quite a lengthy process. In the case of GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, we'd come to a complete standstill, and then the Snowden revelations happened, and suddenly a lot more members of Parliament saw the protection of people's data as a opportune standpoint. So that sort of caused some movement. One last example, in the Netherlands, we had a dragnet surveillance law. Bits of Freedom knew that was coming. I think even in 2013, we heard that it was that the ministry was working on it. Then the Snowden revelations happened, and it was sort of put on a back burner because that wasn't really the best moment to enhance the powers of our secret services. Then finally, it was introduced in 2015 as also on an internet consultation. And what we do at that moment is we do our own analysis and also mobilize other people and organizations and companies to do their analysis and respond to the consultation. And then for the next couple of years, we talk to members of Parliament and try to explain what our concerns are. Sometimes also just trying to explain what it is that a regulation actually, or what the law actually means, especially when it has big technological aspects. The sort of consequences aren't always clear.
Super. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. Maybe also give Leonieke a chance to share a few of their achievements with us.
Yeah, at this moment, I think it's a big achievement that we are. We're a small organization. I think we're not comparable with Bits of Freedom yet. Also, if you see how many people we are at this moment, but I think for us a big we're getting more professional, I think, within our organization, which is an achievement, not for the outside, but for the inside, I think, for the organization of public spaces. So we have this editorial team getting ready and also getting more structural, also with its knowledge base, to get more teams. So we started with this conference, which was really a good starting point. I think that was an achievement. About 1,200 people visited the conference during those 2 days, and people started talking about it, and also, many more partners joined us after this conference. And I think, the momentum to change is there, and it will take a while, and we need a lot of energy, and we all work together on this, but I think it's good that more and more people are switching to Signal instead of WhatsApp, for example, or rethinking the way they reach out to their audience. Should it be Facebook, or is there other ways, or stuff like that?
Yeah, that connects a bit with another question from the audience, Fred Wardy. He's asking, and actually this is a bit of a criticism on this event itself, how do you feel about talks like this being hosted on YouTube and Zoom? Are there alternatives that we should be using instead until a more public space is created? And one of the things that you are doing, Evelyn, and that you shared with us, is supporting the transition, like supporting that this kind of new software that is based on more kind of fair terms is being developed. And it's always a struggle. I mean, also for us as a critical media arts organization, we do use Facebook, and we hate Facebook. And that's basically also one of the things that I heard in the beginning moments of public spaces. Actually, even your former director, Evelyn, of Bits of Freedom, I heard him saying once, if we don't post our events on Facebook, we get half the amount of audience. So it's a catch-22. How do we get out of this catch-22, and what do we do for this moment when these alternatives are maybe not available? Maybe I also have to think of what one artist, Evan Roth, once said, is that we can create alternatives, but mostly these commercial ones are so much more convenient for our audience to use, easier to use, that you will always lose the battle if you don't deliver your alternative platforms that have a similar amount of convenience. Then people are not going to use it, and you will not have the momentum that will make bigger audience move to that alternative platforms. What can you say about this dilemma and how to solve it?
I could go first, looking at Leonieke. So a few things. I think there's a difference between reaching out to audience to sort of new audiences, where, of course, where social media platforms like Facebook are kind of indispensable. Then there are the channels and the events or the types of communication where you do have more control over. Your newsletter or like an event like this would be interesting to see. Well, since we own the sort of the images, why not next to having it on YouTube, also having it somewhere where maybe you don't have all of the functionality, but people can still watch it without being tracked. Another thing that came to mind is the importance of interoperability. I think that will make a huge difference in sort of breaking through these walled gardens so that platforms like YouTube can start competing on the quality of the service they offer rather than on how many people are already there. But I'm sure Leonieke gets this question a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, a lot of organizations in our coalition are working on this, and this is all. This is the whole function of public spaces at this moment, I think, to be storyteller on how people are doing this transition. And Marleen Sticker of Waag, she's also in our board and also part of public spaces with Waag. She always says, okay, but we're in the transition. So this is a start, and you also have to be able to reach out to your audience. So also public spaces is on Twitter, for example, or on LinkedIn, because we have also raising awareness as one of our main goals. And hopefully this will change, but especially smaller communities that start have a choice to build their community or their social digital environment in a different way. And we're, for example, Hall of Fame in Tilburg. It's a skate park and urban for younger people. And they're like, okay, we don't want these young people to book our spaces via Facebook, for example. We don't want to force them to use Google, for example. So they're thinking about, okay, what kind of other digital platforms are there, which we can use, which we can offer to our audience. And at public spaces, we want to tell these stories and tell what went wrong, what's the practical, all the practicalities of this transition, and inspire people to start thinking on to make this transition. And also within public spaces, for example, we're within our organization, we don't use Google Drive, obviously, but it wasn't that obvious because it's pretty hard to find an alternative. And we just switched to the Good Cloud, which is a Dutch provider of Nextcloud, which is also a document sharing platform. and also inspired by Film Museum, who also started using this, and it's not that easy. But the quality and the user friendliness of these tools is one side, but also the privacy of your audience and all the other aspects of the public values that we value in these digital tools are very important. So if you put those both in the scale, then you maybe reconsider which one you want to buy or use.
Thanks a lot. I've got a question which is actually on both your presentations. And Evelyn, you said you addressed this issue of transparency and saying it is a bit overrated. There's too much focus on transparency when it comes to digital policy making, and I think you try to put a focus more on predictability and accountability. And transparency was also in one of your slides, Leonieke, together with the accountability. But maybe, Evelyn, could you say a bit more about your argument on transparency in relationship to predictability and accountability?
Yeah, so I would like to talk about it then in the context of, for instance, Facebook and in the context of the government, because they're really two different things. So if we look at Facebook or Google for that matter, any sort of transparency index report that is done on tech companies, these companies score very, very highly. So that makes me think I feel a healthy dose of skepticism. What is this transparency that they're actually offering? Facebook has started producing transparency reports around their content moderation. And what we see there is that the amount of transparency that they offer is kind of measured in how much information they offer. So how many statistics. And that doesn't actually give us anything. For one, it's Facebook that decides which categories are used, how these statistics are put together, and they don't. The second thing is they also don't offer any course of action. Facebook could year after year after year be very transparent about how they're breaking the law, how they're taking down content that shouldn't be taken down, but that doesn't actually improve the situation. It doesn't offer people a way out or a way to deal with it. So there, I think transparency really isn't enough. When you look at the government, I think another thing comes in, which is predictability. Government should be predictable. You need to know when your rights are going to be infringed on, how, by whom, and what kind of redress you have. Transparency can be an important tool in achieving that, but it's not the end goal itself. So the government should be focusing on being predictable towards its citizens rather than giving citizens, a little bit of recourse or transparency if they can't follow up on the sort of side of predictability and accountability. Does that make it more clear?
Leonieke, maybe is there anything you want to respond about how you see these? Maybe Evelyn, instead of predictability of governments, it could also be reliability. Predictability is hard to see in a positive way, but I understand why you...
Well, I think even reliability or often we also talk about trustworthiness. Mm-hmm. What I really don't like about those terms is that they depart from a citizen. We have to be able to rely on the government. We have to put trust in the government. I think really the responsibility is with the government to show that its behavior is predictable, and when it isn't, that it can be held accountable. And predictable comes from sort of human rights sort of lingo that says governments are allowed to infringe on rights in some cases, but if they do, it has to be a predictable infringement.
Super. Leonieke, sorry for interrupting you just when you started.
No. Interesting stuff. I was thinking about it. I think for public spaces, it's an important value that we have in one of our five public values that we work with. And we just published an article about open source and why it's so important to the road to a more honest internet. And I think Jan Hein Hoogstad, who's one of the founders also of public spaces, and he's more like a philosopher technician, still really close connected to public spaces, and he explains that if it's closed source, so if it's not transparent, also how a tool works. For us, it's more about tools, I think, than about legislation. But you don't own it. So if you can't open it, you don't own it. This quote, and I think that's super important. You need to know how, also as an end user, before you can use it and know how you can use it, you have to know how it's made. And also, maybe you can't code yourself, but you want people who can code to see if to make it transparent how it's made and what choices are made and how a tool works, to see if nobody's having an advantage, if it's open to all kind of groups of people, stuff like that. And it's only working if you make it transparent, which is a complete other side of this transparency. But yeah, that's what I thought about.
Thanks. I would like to have one closing question, and it's a bit of I'm trying to cluster a few questions here. I mean, our project is basically about involving artists, but also other people in this process. Evelyn, you will not be there during the second panel, so that's also why I'm already asking the question to you. How do you think artists can inspire these processes that you want to see happening? We can maybe connect it to the question is, how do you campaign? What makes a successful campaign? And a question that Rachel, one of our co-organizer from Berlin, from School of Machines, is asking, maybe these kinds of actions by artists, these kinds of campaign making could make this whole progress develop faster. So these three questions wrapped into one, I'm curious to hear your response.
Wrapped into one super easy question. So I actually came to the work of Bits of Freedom through the arts and through the work of people such as Jeremy Bailey, Constant Dullaert, Aram Bartel, who's based in Berlin. Maybe some people know his work. And so I would... So I don't have the answer, so just a few thoughts. I think artists and designers, of course, have the sort of ability to inspire people. And both through showing what is possible. I remember the first experiences I had with, for instance, the Internet of Things was through this work by Usman Haq, this architect who had created this sort of super elaborate setup in his house where if his mother on the other side of the world woke up and turned on her coffee machine, a little light would start blinking in his house. So it can really show the positive kind of possibilities of new technologies. Then the second one is that it, I think, allows us to kind of look differently at a lot of things that we take for granted. I love Jeremy Bailey's project, the U Museum, the U Museum, that does this. He makes use of the Google Ad networks to show that you're really followed on everywhere when you're online. So when you turn off your ad blocker, every new site you visit that uses Google Ads network, there Jeremy Bailey is lying in one of his, And then the second thing is this idea of counterpower. I think in the debate about counterpower, at least in the Netherlands, we focused a lot on this counterpower coming from Parliament. And we haven't talked enough about it coming from citizens and from civil society organizations. And I think in that sense, every person has a circle of people around them that they can reach and that they can talk to about becoming politically active. And talking about can be at your kitchen table, but it can also be through your work. So I think artists and designers have a role to play there as well.
Super, thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to add something if we have one moment.
No, go ahead, Leonieke. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, because I think they play an important role, and I think it's no coincidence also that Evelyn and I are on the digital culture committee as an advisor, because I think it's really important. And there's some nice examples as well from at this moment. Also, Tatum in Enschede has a physical but also an online escape room created by Roos Groothuizen, and the escape room is called "I Want to Delete It All, but Not Now." And it's all really about all this difficult transition and also the human aspect of it. Because it's easy to say I want it, but it's very hard to make this transition, to leave WhatsApp if your grandmother is still on there, or your mother-in-law, or whoever, or your hockey team. And she's addressing the hardness of making the transition, and that's really inspiring, I think, because it's helping you to start with it. And also Sander Veenhoff, who is creating these virtual reality or actually augmented reality face masks, making you think about the future of augmented reality, for example.
But Leonieke, one question: do you think these kind of projects get out of this realm of the arts? Do they get enough out in the open, and do they reach the politicians? I mean, we are impressed by the creativity and the visions that they give to us, and the possibilities that they show, but are they really functioning as in this political process?
I think there's a world to win. I think there should be reaching many more people than they reach out now. I think a lot of people, the Stimuleringsfonds Creative Industry tries, of course, by supporting digital culture, for example. But it should be for a way bigger audience. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you have this big conference starting next week, I think, Fake Me Hard, about the role of AI. It's in a big exposition in Rotterdam, and it's also in a neighborhood where a lot of people can visit it while they maybe not too familiar with this topic. And also Tatum, again, in Enschede, they also have a local function. So I think a lot of organizations are trying, but I'm not sure if it reaches politicians. So maybe you as a team, as the CODE team, could figure out a way how to get all these awesome artworks to politicians. That would be great. Yeah. Thanks.
We're going to try hard. That's the aim of this project. Thanks for being with us, Evelyn and Leonieke. We're running a bit late, actually 8 minutes late. Apologies for that. We also were not able to include all the questions from the audience. Also, apologies for that. So in, I think, 7 minutes from now, we'll have a keynote by Gillian C. York. So I suggest the break will be a bit shorter. We hope to see you back in 7 minutes. Thanks a lot, Evelyn, for being with us. Leonieke, you can stick around a bit longer. Looking forward to that. And I hope to see you all soon again in a similar context with similar inspiring talks. Thanks a lot.